Good evening, everybody. My name is Carrie, and I am part of the programming team at the Westport Library. And I'd like to welcome you all to the library's Tough Queer Stories in YA panel. We're really excited to have these authors tonight joining us to talk about their experiences writing challenging queer stories for teen readers. We're also really happy because this event tonight is part of the virtual book tour celebrating the release of Surrender Your Sons, the debut YA novel by panelist Adam Sass.
Yay! Thank you.
Yay! Virtual clapping. So before we dive in, I just want to do a few quick housekeeping things. For all of our attendees tonight, we are going to do a Q&A at the end of the discussion. So if you see the little ask a question little button at the bottom, feel free to post your question at any time, and I'm going to be feeding them to the panelists at the end, towards the end of the discussion. And also, you can purchase books by all 4 of tonight's authors by clicking the little green button that's below that says to purchase books from tonight's authors. So feel free to click on that right there and check out all the work from our authors tonight. So now I'm gonna introduce Adam. It's my pleasure to introduce Adam. He's gonna lead tonight's conversation and introduce our other panelists. Adam Sass began writing books in Sharpie on the backs of Starbucks pastry bags, and he's very sorry if it distracted him from making your grande lattes. He was raised in an Illinois farm town. His desire for a creative career took him to Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and currently in North Carolina, where he lives with his husband and his dachshunds. When he's not dropping hot takes on Twitter, Adam is a reoccurring co-host on the popular Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast, Slayerfest 98, and Surrender Your Sons is his first novel. So Adam, thank you so much for being here. We're so happy to welcome you tonight and be part of this book tour. So I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the rest of our panelists. Have a good discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. Oh my gosh, thank you all for being here. And oh my gosh, what a panel. So many beloveds. So of course I am joined here today by Abdi Nazemian, who is award-winning author of Like a Love Story. We got hello. And then we were also joined by author of Camp and Jack of Hearts and Other Parts. Lev Rosen is with us. And then last but not least, we have Tom Ryan, the award-winning author of Keep This to Yourself. And then next week, he will be delivering the next thriller into our lives, I Hope You're Listening, which I blurbed. It's really great. Thank you all for joining us. How are y'all doing tonight?
Great. Hi, Adam.
Good. We all got through that debate, which I did not see, but hearing about it was flusterating enough. Flustering.
It's the worst thing I've ever seen.
Frustrating. Yeah. It was a thing that happened. So we are now going to be the antithesis of that. And we are not going to talk over each other. In fact, we're going to be way too polite. I'm already seeing. So of course, we're here also to talk really mainly about each of our books. Is queer YA, but also each of our books has dealt with a topic that's either heavy in subject matter, it's touchier subject matter, dealing with conversion therapy, which is in my book. I have queer pain in my book, queer trauma, all the content warnings. On a pack of cigarettes and more, and then Tom, your books also deal with trauma. Abdi, your books deals with the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and then Lev is less traumatic. His books are very, very sweet, but they deal very frankly with sexuality and sexual agency, which people have, but also is definitely something that can be more rarely seen in the kidlit space. Does that about sum up all your?
I feel like we
books?
just played one of these things is not like the other game, but I'm good.
Yes. Okay. Well, regardless, it's something where it's like in these books we are in conversation with things that are the realness. Not that other books do not deal with the realness, but this is something where each of our books, I really do feel kind of looks very starkly at a topic. And And each of us has been very vocal about that's a good thing. But I'll probably, Lev, since we just started finishing talking about you, and you do enjoy talking a bit about this, why is it so important that queer YA especially deal so frankly with sexuality, as your books do, and among other topics? But why look so frankly at
Why
something
sex?
something like that? Why dirty?
Yeah.
Why?
Why sex? I think, with Jack of Hearts, which is really which definitely has, non-sex related trauma as well, but both books do sort of deal frankly with sex. And I think it's important to talk very frankly about queer sex, because otherwise queer teenagers are not really getting any kind of sex education. Even in, I went to a super liberal private high school in New York City. I lived Gossip Girl, and the sex ed in my high school was condoms on bananas. And after Jack of Hearts came out, I actually contacted that high school and was like, what's going on with sex ed? And they're like, we are finally instituting queer stuff in sex ed this year. And that was last year. So if that's a super liberal private high school in New York City, then what are you getting at a public high school in Oklahoma? And you're getting no sex education, or you're getting very fear-driven, heterosexually based stuff. And so queer teenagers who are like, all right, so sex, how does that work for me, tend to just go to porn. And there's nothing wrong with ethically made porn. I have no problem with it. But it's a fantasy. It's not sex ed. It's not, telling a kid. It's not modeling what sex should be like. If you think your first time is going to be porn and you go into it expecting that and it's not, then that will, result in some of the dark trauma that you three are writing about.
Yes. Oh my God. You have linked it back together so greatly. Yeah. I mean, I always say that it's hard enough to get schools to teach the birds and the bees before we even get to the bees and the bees. But I think the thing is just again, across genders, across sexual orientations, we do see a prevalence of people sort of getting the wrong idea from either if it is from porn, or if it is from movies in general, who are maybe presenting us in this kind of inauthentic space that's either too glamorized or too something. That's something where queer people really do not see really any regular life depictions of what their people who are sexual go into, what they're going to experience, or what they're even going to see.
Straight kids too. There was a couple years ago, there was this whole article in New York Times Magazine where they spoke to some women who had done a project, essentially talking to boys ranging from 11 to 13 and girls about porn and what they'd seen and what that made them think about sex. And a lot of the boys, and we're talking 11, 12-year-old boys, had seen the porn, and they essentially were like, oh yeah, I would absolutely try anal with a girl without talking to her beforehand, because I assume they love it based on porn. And that's what we're dealing with, essentially. And so, I feel like you gotta write, you want to show teens what healthy sex looks like.
Right. Well, I think it's important for your book because, especially Jack of Hearts, where it's not just frank sexuality. You're showing, lots of you're in conversation with. Here's what consent is. Here's what this is. You're going through all of the. I mean, you are giving sort of a very plot-driven sex ed class in this, where it's about here's the joy you can find with it, but also here are the responsibilities, and here's where it can go too far. Here's where you have to be careful for people who treat it this sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So Abdi, I want to talk about I mean, obviously, like a love story, like a love story deals with, probably one of the heaviest eras in the queer community's existence. And there really was no way to tell that story. I feel like you and I kind of live in this, our books sort of live in the same universe where it's like, well, there was really no way to engage with this topic lightly. You have to sort of either do it or don't do it.
Right.
So what was that process like when you first realized you were like, oh, I'm going to tell a queer YA book set in this era with this with this subject matter in hand, and just really kind of go for that?
Well, I mean, honestly, I grew up in that era, and I felt like my experience was not one that I had ever really seen represented. And I think part of that is because most of the stories, for good reason, focus on the generation that was on the front lines of the epidemic. So, the generation that came just after, which was mine, our stories really hadn't been told. And I really wanted to write about what it was like to come of age, when AIDS was at its worst, realizing you were gay, realizing what sex and sexuality was when it already was, being portrayed as a death sentence by the media and by communities, and then on top of that, obviously writing my own experience as an immigrant on top of it, coming from a country where being gay is punishable by death. So it was like this perfect storm of just awfulness. But I guess what really surprised me about the process of writing the book is how much joy and hope and connection ended up being a part of it. What I started to realize as I wrote the book is the path that got me to where I am now was a path that was full of being constantly saved and inspired by artists and activists and mentors and friends. And to me, the book really, of course it's sad. There's trauma in there. There's no way to write about that era of queer history without being honest about all of that. But I think there is also quite a bit of hope and connection and joy. And so, I think those are the things that surprise me more than the trauma, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think that's what's made that book really, really come alive for folks, is that I think, and I've seen this also in the few weeks my book has been out. You're telling basically the same story I've been saying, which is, it's like, yeah, there really is no way to tell the story of queer victory, because in order to have queer victory, there has to be an obstacle, there has to be a villain, there has to be a thing you're fighting against, and through that you really see kind of what this community is at its best capable of, and that's something where I really loved seeing people respond to your book. That's what I got from your book. That's something where I feel like if you're really plugged into that, even though there is sadness, I think the biggest takeaway you do leave with a certain kind of joy watching that.
And your book obviously is about, very heavy subject matter, but is full of humor and connection and friendship. And I think that that's the thing about the queer community is, throughout history, there's been so much struggle, but the thing that, has united us is coming together, support, love, music, dancing. I mean, there's so much joy within the community, no matter what, we're struggling against. And I think, reminding people of that. And in the same way that I think what Lev was saying about seeing sex represented on the page, it's important to see that joy represented on the page when the struggle is also happening, because they can coexist, and I think too often people think that everything has to be one thing, that you can only be one emotion, when in fact you can be, angry and happy and joyful and lustful and all of those things in one, day, especially when you're a teenager, or these days when we're going through the apocalypse and we go through 30 emotions in a day, it's
very Goldie Hawn in First Wives Club, what you just said just now, which is very I'm an actress, I have all the emotions.
I'm an actress.
Because that's what it is. It's living that way in normal life. That's why we respond to I think characters like that and all that, because I don't know, it just seems it's an emotional life, and I think it's just more interesting, and I respond definitely more to stories that do show, it doesn't have to be about this, you know, traumatic event, but that does show the depth of, like, there's fear, there's this, there's that, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. It's not just that every day is, you're dealing with, I feel like 20 more emotions than anybody else is walking down the street. And I feel like YA is the perfect age category to be representing that for people, because it's like you have the teenager and then you have like queer teens who are experiencing 50 emotions, many of them for the first time, and they like, oh yeah, this is how other queer people feel as well. They just think that they're this like person who's like at 11 the whole time.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it's, and the other thing is, like, you hit on this before, which is it's what we're dealing with now. Like, we're dealing with so much input, and most of that input is very bad and very doom and very this and that. And I feel like a lot of what these heavy books that can be really manuals, and that's how I view Surrender Your Sons, is it's really like, if it might not be conversion therapy, but he's dealing with parents and neighbors who are, you know, who are conspiracy theorists and, you know, believe anything, will believe any conspiracy before they believe him. And that's something where I think that we're all kind of dealing with that right now, of like, how can you not see this thing that is happening right in front of your face? And so I really view Surrender Your Sons as a manual to help young queers who maybe, you know, I feel like adult people who have, you know, experience living through really bad administrations, you know, they don't have, you know, the tool, they don't know, they haven't lived, this is their first time living through like a really terrible administration. And it's and hopefully this can be kind of a guidebook of like, this is how to still find joy even when like literally everything is bad and up in the air.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
no, go ahead.
We're being polite. I was just going to say, I think that what you're talking about, this sort of, the idea that there's this trauma with people believing anything but you, essentially, is very teenage, and it is also very queer. I feel like, you know,
Yes.
this was Jack of Hearts for me. This was, you know, adults do not believe teenagers baseline, and then anytime you add anything to that teenagerness that makes them more of a minority, queerness, femaleness, they become less believed. And,
right.
You know, or sometimes it's even like, you know, they're making it up because they're an overdramatic gay, they're hypersensitive gay, they're, you know, that sort of stuff gets thrown at us, and it gets thrown at teenagers all the time. And to feel like no one believes you is sort of a real never-ending trauma.
Yeah.
The idea of no one believes me is a cornerstone of all great thrillers. So that's sort of, it's either no one believes me or I can't trust anyone. Usually it's kind of both. And that's something where that's a good lead into Tom's books, which is thrillers where you have characters who are really fighting against, especially in your most recent, I hope you're listening, your main character is trying to uncover something that, you know, a crime that many people feel very motivated to like just pretend never happened or want to get over really quickly. Your characters, especially in Keep This to Yourself, are trying to uncover stuff or trying to dig up old wounds to solve them for real this time. And there's a lot of resistance to that. So I feel like, is there anything you want to tell us? Do you have old business that seems to be your thing?
Well, I want to apologize first. Apparently I'm very blurry, but hopefully you can hear me okay. You know, it's interesting to hear. You can hear me okay, good. You know, the trauma in my most recent books, I started writing kind of contemporary YA, sort of your conventional coming out narratives about 8-9 years ago. And when I shifted into the mystery thriller genre, it's almost like I'm coming at this backwards, because for me, I heard from so many teens who didn't want to hear, you know, there's I'm a big believer in a great coming out story. I think they're necessary and universal, but I kept hearing from teens who wanted to see queer teens, LGBTQ stories that were about teens involved in other stuff. And I mean, we've all heard that over the years. You know, why can't we be off in outer space, having adventures, that kind of thing. And for me, I really respond to the mystery thriller genre. So I wanted to write about queer teens solving mysteries, and they're just kind of your normal everyday teens. There's not a whole lot of emphasis placed on their queerness other than the fact that they just exist. They're queer, they have their romantic lives. But it's kind of the convention, you know, the standard convention in mysteries and thrillers is that your detective needs to have past trauma. And so I tried to write that in from kind of a different angle in both cases. So, whereas I think, Adam, with Surrender Your Sons, one of the brilliant things about that is that all the stuff you were just talking about, this sort of, you know, ongoing sense of, you know, how do I exist in this world where adults don't take me seriously? And not only that, they want to cause me harm. And then you channel that into this epic, amazing, rousing adventure, was just kind of a you know, this perfect melding of two things all at once.
Thank you. I felt like I was doing a Tom Ryan book with the jungle like background on the filter, because it definitely was.
You know, it's, you can take, if you tell somebody that this is a book about conversion therapy and leave it at that, people have a certain idea of what that book is going to be about. They're certainly not. I think the fact that you were able to take that germ of an idea and throw it into this, you know, mystical jungle adventures is a pretty amazing thing. It's a pretty special book. So I'm happy to be here on one of your events. Anyway, to talk about me a little bit.
Thank you.
I do think that the trauma in my books is, I thought about this a lot as we were leading up to this event, because in I Hope You're Listening, the main character starts a podcast as a way of dealing with her, I guess you could call it PTSD. She has 10 years of survivor's guilt from having witnessed her best friend being kidnapped when they were playing in the woods together as kids. And she was the only witness, and she was unable to give the authorities any, you know, insights into that would lead them to finding her best friend. And so it's a cold case. She was never found. And, you know, if you're a little kid and you deal with this and you're center of this major mystery, you're going to have a lot of, you know, shit to deal with. And Dee channels her guilt into a podcast designed to help missing people be reunited with their loved ones. And, you know, not to go too far into the plot, but basically what happens is the podcast is successful. It actually, to her surprise, actually has some successful outcomes. And then another girl goes missing in her small town, and the old mystery comes churning back up, and she kind of has to descend back into her trauma and, you know, kind of figure out maybe whether she can actually solve the mystery that she's been trying to get away from her whole life.
Yeah.
And to keep this juice, and so that one, it's a little bit, it's not the queerness isn't as tied to the trauma as it is maybe in Keep This to Yourself, where, you know, I can't say a whole lot about it without spoiling, but, you know, Max grief and trauma and Keep This to Yourself is directly tied to his feelings for his best friend who died, and you know, a straight best friend who died, and maybe Mac had you know, certain it was an unrequited scenario. And now I'm just kind of rambling, but
no, he had listen, he was crushing on his straight best friends. It was, you're dealing with the biggest queer trauma queers have.
Yeah. And then what if that friend dies? And then what if, right?
My gosh, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the stuff that you're engaging with, I think, you know, the reason why I find your books very interesting is, you know, because I mean, there's some stuff like, I think with Leb and Minds and Abdi's books that were our books, because of the nature of the subject matter, we are more directly communicating with you know, queerness and queer identity and like direct aspects of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's
Definitely.
even more tricky in books where the queerness is not the part of the story. You know, there's a killer on the, you know, there's a in Keep This to Yourself, a reign of terror of the serial killer in this town has ended a year ago, and it ended with Mac's best friend being killed. And it was just one of those things where everybody kind of has to get on and get over it. It's an amazing book. I I read it on a plane, and I was just like the whole plane ride, just like looking around. Remember planes? It was all good time. I know some people are still on planes, but me, I'm gonna say to myself, remember planes. But
so Adam, I have a question sorry, go ahead.
No,
you're talking. I want to know how did you find that balance between this really heavy subject and a super fun adventure? How did you do that? How did you strike that balance so perfectly? Because you really did nail it.
Thank you. It was one of those things where I nailed it because I had to, and I had the benefit of 7 years of trial and error. So I had a lot of experiments where the beakers shattered from the chemistry. Like, it did not work. So I think over time, and I had, I think I had the benefit of that. But to be less glib, I would say a big reason how I was able to really balance that is like I never in this final version, I never, like, there's laughs and there's thrills, but I never like consciously was like, someone's gonna tell a joke right now, or there's gonna be a twist and it's gonna be super cool. The way I was kind of approaching this was like, I'm going to tell the story of this. In general, I sort of think in sort of grand locations. The location itself made it sort of very dramatic. But I think, I have over a dozen queer speaking characters in this book. So and queer people, when they are in a like this, when they're in a low stakes environment, they're like freaking out and quipping. But like, this is like a really like high stakes, everybody's life is in danger situation. And so it just became very natural just to be like, okay, how would I react in this situation? How would my friend react? How would this friend react? And usually it was like, quipping, and it was this and that. And, and I learned a lot from stuff like, Buffy, shows that like really did masterfully balance, like, okay, we're dealing with vampires and goofy makeup, and sexy teens making jokes, but then we're also really also dealing with like losing your mom, or we're dealing with I had sex with my boyfriend and now he's being evil to me. I think I learned a lot from that show, and a lot of kind of similar things like that. I just found it to be, that's the style that really speaks to me the most, because I love the different flavors it brings out.
So did you go into it knowing the tone that you wanted to achieve, or is that something you kind of discovered in the writing?
I knew that I really wanted to hit kind of not a campy tone, but like something where I wanted it to be fun. Like, I wanted it to be like, I didn't want it to be this thing where everyone was like frowning, or like where it was unrelenting and no one had a moment. Like, I wanted it to be legit, like how me and my friends would get through a situation like that. And then there would be someone who would be having a hard time, but even in the hard time, like, I mean, we've had months and months and months of hard times. Every time I text a friend, even if it's like the heaviest text possible, there are still like lightness and jokes and familiarity and warmth, and it's a salve for that. Like, it's really important. So I did really, yes, go in going like, yeah, I want this to have the kind of queer authenticity that is authentic to me, which is they're gonna get through this the way the way I handle these sorts of situations. And the more I did them, like, the finer and finer and finer that tone became.
I think, Adam, I follow the Surrender Your Sons hashtag, and you've seen a lot of the nice things people have had to say about your book, for sure. But one of the things that strikes me is how many people have been really affected by the conversion therapies part of the book. And many people have said, I had to step back and take a minute and then go back in, knowing that you were going to pull them through the story carefully. You were guiding people through this really difficult but exciting story. So I think you should deserve a lot of credit for it.
Thank you so much.
People are seriously responding to it.
Thank you. I've really loved the response people have had with it, which is I've been joking with a few people who have had this response, but there's been no less than like 5 times that I have heard when they finish the book, they've said, "Oh, I need to go take a walk right now." Like I've heard like that exact phrasing. Like they're like, "Oh, I need to go take a walk right now." And I just need to think about this for a minute. Which is great, which any author would kill for is like it's not just, you know, how many times have you finished a book and you go, "Oh, that was fun, done," and then go making dinner. And Ryan LaSalle has indeed killed for it, he says. So we cannot turn our backs on him, gang. But the thing is just it's one of those things where the response has been really, really wonderful. I love, you know, that people trusted that I would take them through the book, and a big part of that is my author's note. If you've read the book, or if not read the book yet but seen posts about it, I have an author's note at the very, very beginning of the book, author's note with content warnings. I didn't want to do a traditional trigger warning thing because, as I joked in the beginning of this, if you listed all the potential trigger warnings on this, it would look like a pack of cigarettes. But I didn't want it to be like so scary that people think like I'm just leading them into a bramble, and just to leave them there. Like I sort of opted for, I really wanted to do this. I wanted them to hear from me up front, and I kind of was like, well, I'm gonna pretend like I'm, you know, Walt Disney doing his like intro videos. Like I just want to do this kind of like, I want people to kind of just hear me, see me, and have me say like, hey, I know like this is a story. Yeah, very Alfred Hitchcock. Like that's like that these sort of where the author and the creator is very present in it. And I didn't want to be super present during the book, but I wanted it up front to just say, hey, everybody, I know you know, it's a tough year. We're dealing with queer pain, which, you know, has been kind of a no-no word online a bit, thrown around a bit sometimes, where, you know, people are doing it a little more, been accused of doing it a little more fetishistically, like, you know, like they're enjoying dragging people through these painful stories. And I just was like, well, you know, I wanted to tell a story about the queer community. And I wanted to do it through the hardship of, you know, conversion therapy. And I wanted, I wanted to not forget about queers who are young and see all of these, see It Gets Better videos and see marriage equality and see, you know, and see, you know, all these great shows and movies where we're around and celebrated and doing really well. But then they go home and they know that their family is trouble. And so here's all these other queer people having a good time, but not you. You're just like, you know, you maybe deserve that. I feel like all this progress has, you know, for all the good, you know, I'm not saying it's like bad this happened, but, you know, every time there is a big step forward, there is, you know, there are these kind of shadowy pockets where, you know, I knew that there was going to be, you know, and I knew because around the time where marriage equality was happening, I was speaking with a friend of a family friend, and they were having trouble coming out. They had a really bad go of it, and a lot of it just really centered on everything was great. Why is this still? Everything is great. Why am I still sad? Why am I still scared? You know, why is my family still like this? It was kind of like a what's wrong with me kind of thing. And that's really why I began writing Surrender Your Sons. I was like, well, I don't want in our headstrong progress to do, you know, beautiful, like empowering, sunny queer YA where the queerness isn't even part of it. A lot of these kids are still very much in conversation with this in their own heads. I wanted there to be something that was potentially giving them a little less isolation and a little less otherness, because that's something that Connor goes through very clearly in the beginning of the book is, you know, he's kind of, you know, told, you know, by his boyfriend that like you come out and everything's going to be great, and as good intention as that was, like, it's not true for everybody, and that's something that even adult queer people don't realize is the truth. That there is like just so much more that people have to deal with, and so he really feels like, okay, so everyone's either lying or they're super lucky, because like this sucks. I've been out for 2 months and like literally my life is worse. I feel awful about it. I feel worse about this even when I was closeted. What's happening? And then he's swept off to this island, and he really has no choice but to activate, and really become, the hero that he does become. But I wanted that to be something where, queers deal with pain. They deal with these heavy topics. Just because, some folks are like wish, that wasn't so, does not make that so. And there still does need to be some books that do touch on that do provide a little bit of instruction on that, because the reason it gets better, like videos got made 10 years ago. We're experiencing sort of the 10-year anniversary of It Gets Better videos. The reason that was made out of a need, because, generationally, adult queer people don't have the sort of mentorship access to young queers. This information has been, that information pipeline is cut off, really, except through media, except through books and shows and movies. That's really the only method we have of really communicating these ideas of, this is what your life is going to look like, or this is how you deal with these different things. So
I think you did that so well, and you just sort of vocalized everything that I really, really love about your book. And I think also it's important to say that that's not just a message that queer kids need to hear. I think that, we see a lot of straight kids these days who look around and they feel like all the narratives they see about queer people are happy, charming, whatever. And so they assume that queer people do not experience homophobia anymore, and that homophobia is like something in the past that happened a long time ago. And straight kids need to know that this is something that is going on to their queer peers so that they can support them, and not like, it can almost be like an act of violence to be like, what are you talking about? That doesn't happen. Like, no. Like, homophobia doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
this is why it's so important to have queer books written by queer authors. And it's so nice to be on this panel, because I think for so long, we were represented in works that weren't always written by queer people or in films. And, very often our experiences were fetishized. So we would be just like, like one stereotype that comes to mind is like the gay sidekick who's like the girl's best friend and is fun and goes shopping. And like, I definitely feel like there's this version, of queer people that is very palatable, that not just the sex away, but the pain away. And I find when I read books, that really represent the queer experience, when authors really dive deep into their psyche, there's inevitably pain and anger there. And I think that's really, really important to show people, because I think a lot of us learned to hide that part of ourselves away because it made people uncomfortable when we were experiencing it. I mean, I don't know if you guys had that, but I definitely had that. And it really was in my writing that I started to get in touch with those emotions and put words to them. And I just think it's really, really important, both for our community to work through it, but for other people to know that that's how we feel a lot of the time because of society.
It's hard because, like, you kind of do, it's where you get into the intersectionality of queerness, where it's like all of society cross section. You have all the problems of the full society. Then add in like queerness, where people are really like super not like, in general, people like don't like, ooh, you're angry or you're responding angrily. I don't like that. Like it's its own controlling behavior. And we see this time and time again in the news and other stories. And I think that's something where, to your point, Abdi, like where, like, I think if you trace the evolution of queer characters over like the last half a century in movies, TVs, books, whatever, you'll see this sort of like, in order to like break free of a stereotype, you have to really overcorrect. Like it's going to be, okay, we're murderers and predators. Okay, let's overcorrect. All right, we're bunny rabbit, sidekick, shopping, smiley, jokey, quippy,
right,
not having relationships persons. And then now, you know, like we're kind of having to like kind of correct from that again. Well, then there was also like, then there was like the early 2000s of like, you know, the sort of like normalization of queerness, where it was like, no, we're exactly like you, we're just like you, we're the same people, we're the same, we go to the Abercrombie store, we love the same stuff, we're the same, please don't kill us. And now we're like, now I feel like we're in this vibe where I'm really like, I'm actively like, we are not the same. A lot of us kind of, you know, see the world differently, and like you said, but like a lot of us have, you know, even in sunny YA or sunny, you know, representations, I think there is still a ton of room for, you know, really tying back to that pain and anger. And like, even if it's just like, I mean, I'm one of my next books is I'm writing a rom-com is my next one. So, but within that, there is, I was like, I can't do a rom-com unless, so it's like he's out to like date a bunch of people, and he's trying to get like a first boyfriend, and within that there is this deep reservoir of like loneliness, where he's like, the reason he's being so like 100% like gotta get a date is just like, there's so much like all-encompassing loneliness he's running away from. So like, I mean, even then you do have to still stay in conversation with that.
Absolutely. Well, for me, it's also just, it goes back to that idea of all the emotions. It's always First Wives Club. But it's like, you know, we're not one thing. If you're writing a rom-com, of course there's going to be layers of other emotions. And if you're writing about trauma, of course there's going to be joy. I mean, I think that's the thing. I mean, where you get into trouble when you have those stereotypes is like the queer characters who are just one thing. They only exist to like come and deliver a few jokes to service, you know, another person. Like that's, but I think what, you know, when you're writing nuanced characters who are going to go through a gamut of things, then that's good. That's progress. That's like writing individual characters, and in the specificity, people start to understand that we're three-dimensional people, not, you know, a type or a label or any of that stuff.
Agreed. And I think in general, like if you are writing queer, if you're writing queerness, if you're writing any sort of queerness into your books, which we all encourage, because we need to, as Molly has just said in our chat, we need to be everywhere. I want to see us in space, in underwater books, in horror, in like everywhere. Like we need to just be in all the genres. Like that's the problem, is that we are suffocating in only showing up a few times. I think if you are going to write queerness, you do, you know, I think that's one of those things where really making sure that you're not just reskinning a straight person or straight character, because you're just being aware that you are dealing with a whole bunch of different set of given circumstances, just like any character, that sort of thing. So I think in general, like even in Surrender Your Sons, when I was writing queer characters who were outside of my lived experience exactly, it was very vital that I just put around Twitter, read the responses to other books, you know, and like see like what are people liking, what are people not liking, what is, you know, really dig into like making sure I wasn't just writing the same like cis gay over and over again, but just with different like, you know, stuff on. Like that needed to feel that authenticity. So I think you do need to go into that knowing that. I think it's time for some questions from the audience.
I was just going to pipe up because we actually had a question that's kind of along the lines of what you all are discussing in terms of writing, you know, complex characters. So there's a question: how do you balance writing not entirely likable queer YA characters. Do you think audiences are becoming more accepting of non-perfect gays?
They're gonna have to be, because like I'm telling you, like I'll monopolize this conversation only for one more minute. But like it's there's another book I'm writing, another thriller where I am intentionally writing really, you know, messy, sort of mean joke, really like shining a light on the messiness of gay friendship and how queers are to each other when no straights are around watching them. Like, how do they talk to each other? And it gets pretty messy. Like, it gets like that. So I think that's something where I am a little nervous about once that goes into the marketplace, how people will respond to it. But in general, I think that's just one of those things where like that's coming because you need to, and in general in YA, we need to just be way more comfortable with messy characters and not call them anti-heroes. Like, because I literally like have seen like, you know, Connor, he's an anti-hero, and I was just like, what? Like, because he's like mouthy. I don't know. I don't get that. But yeah, I just think that's something where in general we need to like in YA just need to be like, these are teens, let them be messy. These are people, let them be messy. And these are queer teen people, let them be messy.
Yeah, no, I find it ridiculous to write a teenager who isn't a mess. Like, you know, they can be good kids, but they're still a mess. And I don't even like writing good kids that much because, I don't know, no personal experience there. But
Can't relate.
Can't relate. But I will say, like, it is very interesting once it's like out in the world to see people really, one of the, you know, Jack of Hearts is so much about the idea of like the way straight society tries to make queer people behave a certain way and be a very good gay, and like how he is not a good, like, I love Jack to death, and he is in my heart a good kid, but he doesn't study, he's smoking, he's doing drugs, he's sleeping with whoever he wants. So in that sense, he's a bad kid. And people, it just seemed to go over their heads, I guess, in that they were responding to him the same way, like they agreed with the stalker without even realizing that that's what they were doing. They were like, yeah, I wish this guy, like, but then there was this one review on Goodreads. I never go to Goodreads. Don't ever go to Goodreads. I know, but I saw it, and it was amazing. And it was this older woman. She said she was an older woman, and she said that she, like, first 20 pages or something, she was like, I hate this kid so much. This is a bad kid. But she finished the book. And when she finished the book, she realized, she's like, yes, this is a bad kid. I would not want to be around, like, I wouldn't want to be friends with this person as a teenager. But I think he's like a real person and I love him, even if I don't want to hang out with him. And that to me was like, okay, good. There, like, I won. Like,
it's nice that your mom wrote that.
I won in my way. Just like that sort of, I think it's like the idea that once we really start seeing the humanity in each other, and once we see that no matter what kind of queer person you are, you're worthy of love, which is something that like straight society does not tell you. Straight society is very concise about what sort of queer people are worthy of love. And that's what we got to break out of.
Hun, how many times you can't even go around like Tumblr without seeing like all of these fandoms for these straight like characters who are just like rascally, like one is just like people are just like super standing the devil like in like in TV shows. Like it's just Hannibal Lecter is like, oh, he's this great cool guy, blah blah blah. And then like your kid Jack is just like this great kid who's like is not inhibited and is just, you know, and is just gonna do whatever, and people are really like poop in their pants. It was great. So yeah, I quite agree.
What are, or have you all faced any barriers within the publishing industry, either as writers or through content in books?
Abdi, tell me you want
barriers. Honestly, like I feel like I face more barriers in film and TV, which I write in, which is a much like harder. There's just more barriers to entry in terms of how to get a TV show or a movie made. And I think when you're writing a lot of content about Iranian characters and queer Iranian characters, that's not exactly what they're clamoring for. So that's like part of the reason I started writing books, is because I wanted to, you know, before I'm done, like write some really personal stories about my community. And I felt like I wasn't going to get to do that in film and TV. So I'm mostly very like positive about publishing in terms of at least the barriers as far as the kinds of stories you get to tell. My first book wasn't like published by a traditional publisher though. And, you know, I think that that was like a real lesson in the different ways that you can get a book out there and, you know, the kind of hustle that you need. Like, I think the bigger barrier that concerns me is like, once the book is out there, how do you get noticed? How, you know, there's so many books out there, there's so many authors, and like, you know, once you tell the story, you actually want it to have an impact and to get into the hands of the readers who need it. And those, there are a lot of barriers there, and it's
tough.
Very hard.
Yeah, that's quite true. Quite true.
I think it can be difficult to talk about this without sounding like you're griping, and sometimes it's almost as if you feel like you're being gaslit when you talk about publishing. So keep this to yourself, which I'm going to pat myself on the back for a moment. It's had a great response. It's won awards. It's been on all sorts of lists. It's a good book. It's a great mystery. You can buy it online right now. And it went to
in paperback. It's
several. Great. It's in paperback. And Adam, I think my experience kind of reflects yours with Surrender Your Sons, which is I was really confident. This was my, my fourth, fifth YA book, and I was really confident it was the best thing I'd ever written. And then, we took it out on submission, and one house after the other, it was going to acquisitions and coming back. And they were saying, "Oh, we don't know how to market it." I'm like, it's a pretty straightforward mystery, but it's a well-written mystery. It's got a great, a few great twists. There's nothing really, it's not over the top unconventional. And it's hard not to feel, eventually it did get published, and that's great, and it's done well, but it's hard not, and I know your experience was similar with Surrender Your Sons, Adam, where you start to question your own sanity. Is the book, is my confidence unfounded? And you don't want to write off all of these people, but when it's one rejection after another, you start to ask yourself, does it have something to do with the fact that it's a queer book? And I don't know, maybe that's unfair of me to say that, but no,
I think
you're left wondering, right?
Fully saying that.
What's that?
That's the thing.
I've gotten passes that they use couched language, but the scope of the audience based on this book, stuff like that, you get. It's all over the place. It's not paranoia.
Yeah.
Homophobia.
It's thrillers in general. Thrillers in YA are having a good time right now. They're really surging, and it's great, and we're seeing some great ones. But then you add in the queerness, and then people sort of read the numbers and they just go, okay, there's fantasy YA, then there's rom-com YA, then there's thriller YA, then there's queer thriller YA, then there's Tom Ryan and Adam Sass is queer YA. Yeah. So it's and they're like, oh, these 5 copies. But no, I kid, but it is Tom, what you said. We had Surrender Your Sons, I say this all the time, but Surrender Your Sons was rejected. If you combine the agent and editor rejections, it was rejected 110 times. It was rejected by every last soul in this business. And I know I sound like Betty Davis right now, but I'm and Jack Warner hated the picture. He didn't think it was gonna go, but he was wrong. but that is really how I feel about it. Like it was something where, but I have to like really echo Abdi, where it's just, it's, you know, this is the best space YA right now to advance queer stories. So everything we say has to be taken with a grain of salt. Like, it is the tip of the spear as far as representation. I mean, again, there's it needs to go so much further, as everything does. But right now, this is the only place where I have seen it be this far along. So it is a privilege and an honor to write within it. Having said that, there have been rejections that are so annoying and cloaked. And in general, just, you know, it's I knew I wrote a book that was difficult to, you know, just in general, I knew I wrote a weird, dark humor, trauma, queer book. Like, I knew it was not going to be like, I didn't write like Star Wars. I knew that there was going to be, it was going to be niche. It was going to have a niche sort of effect within that, because, and it's something where in general, people were like, oh, I don't really know how to market something that's this humorous with something that has this heavy of a subject matter. Because that was the people who totally got it themselves were like, I'm petrified about how to sell this to a buyer, or, you know, like Abdi said before, like, those barriers really, even though those barriers are coming in the acquisitions process, they're really about fears of those barriers that are waiting for us in high school libraries,
Right.
regular libraries, just in general, like how you can, you know, have access to that sort of thing. Because, you know, if your book has, you know, sexual content, it's going to be, you know, people are going to raise some eyebrows. You know, my book has sexual content, not as like obviously on the book jacket as Leb's, but like, it is there, you know. So people who do read it, you know, and teen librarians who read that are going to know, like, okay, we're gonna make sure this goes specifically to older high school students, which is great. I really believe YA should have way more compartmentalization categories. It should like be middle grade, lower YA, upper YA, and whatever. I mean, like, smarter people than I have like already like argued this, but I do feel like there needs to be, we can't all just be in the same pot. That's like lunacy. And I think that's where heavy YA subjects come in, is because we have all taken English classes where we've been given like really heavy subject matter in high school to read and to talk about and to discuss, like we're on the floor of the freaking Senate. And we all had to do that. And I think with queer stuff, I think we're getting there, but it is taking a little bit. And honestly, it's really the bravery of librarians and teen librarians and, you know, people who run bookshops and whatnot that are really the ones who are allowing that access. That's something where it's,
yeah,
they're the ones who are, I mean, again, even then, like, I know librarians are, like, I've spoken with so many librarians who are like, I'm actively trying to make this happen. There is the resistance in these following areas. And so they are trying, even though you might not see that like effect like right away. People are out there in all these different libraries across the country trying to advance this. And that's definitely something worth fighting for.
Mm-hmm. There's silent bans all over the country on anything queer. Where they just don't order it because the librarian doesn't want to deal with the complaints.
Because that's the thing. It's the fear of it coming, not like, oh, it actually was a thing. Because there were so many fears during sub about Surrender Your Sons, like, oh this, oh that, oh this, oh that, and it came out, and no one's had a damn, like, I mean, like that I've seen, and I've actually been the debut silly person who's gone looking for that sort of thing, and I haven't seen it. So,
yeah. So one thing you can do is go to your library and ask for these books, even if you bought it already. Even if you go to every library in the area, be like, oh, do you have this book? Do you have this book? Go to every indie bookstore, ask for this book, ask if they have it. Make sure that it's on their radar and that they know people in their community want that book, because otherwise they're not going to put it up there because they just see it as a potential problem.
Exactly right. And I think that's the power that readers have, is that they can ask for that. And I think the more readers really actively expand, not just reading queer YA, but reading different types of queer YA. There is so much queer YA out there. And then sometimes I will see, like, you know, Bookstagram stuff where even stacks where my book is included. I'm like, there were 15 different queer books that came out on my same day. And there's so many. I think the more you actively work to include, like, just please never stop expanding the types of queerness you are reading about, and make sure that also gets promoted, because then the more you have this, the narrower your scope, it's just the narrower your scope, the narrower the whole industry is going to be. Readers have an enormous direct impact on that. Publishers and whatnot are only doing what is selling. So just make it sell, make it work. Yeah.
So
Awesome. Well, I think on that note, we are going to wrap up. We're right at time. I want to thank you all so much for doing this tonight. This was an incredibly interesting conversation, so well needed now that so many queer spaces, safe spaces have been limited due to the pandemic. And so this conversation, I felt like it was just really, really awesome. So thank you all so much for taking the time. Adam, good luck on your continued book tour journey, virtual book tour journey.
Thank you.
So please click on the link or check out, all of the authors tonight through their various websites, Twitter. We have all their information on our website, the westportlibrary.org. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you back soon. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much. And
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
hopefully we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.